Right now on Morning News Now, in the red, worry on Wall Street after stocks slide for a second straight day. Now President Trump pushing back against fears of a recession, easing off economic threats to double tariffs against Canada.
And ultimately, the biggest win is not the tariff. That's a big win. It's a lot of money. But the biggest win is if they move into our country and produce jobs.
Plus, hundreds more federal workers on the chopping block. The Education Department preparing to get slashed in half. We have team coverage. Also this morning, countdown to shutdown. Just 2 days from the deadline, a GOP-backed funding bill to keep the government running, narrowly passing the House. But it's facing an uncertain fate in the Senate. We'll bring you the latest from Capitol Hill. Plus, up in smoke, researchers pouring cold water on a long-held theory why vaping may not actually help people quit smoking. And creating community. This morning, a candid conversation about the importance of online spaces for LGBTQ plus youth. We're going to talk to the folks behind an eye-opening new study about their efforts to make the digital world safer and more supportive. Good to have you with us this morning. I'm Joe Fryer. Savannah is on assignment. We begin with the two biggest themes that have dominated President Trump's return to office: his ongoing push to downsize the federal government and his tariffs on America's biggest trading partners. Last night, the Department of Education announced it would be slashing its workforce by about half. That means around 1,300 employees will receive termination notices. The move is the first in the Trump administration's plans to eliminate the department altogether, though that would require congressional approval. As for trade policy, overnight, the Trump administration imposed a 25% tariff on all steel and aluminum imports. It's the latest escalation in a global trade war that is roiling financial markets. This morning, the European Union says it will retaliate by imposing tariffs on $28 billion worth of U.S. goods starting in April. Speaking at a business roundtable yesterday, the president again defended his trade policy.
But the biggest win is if they move into our country and produce jobs. That's a bigger win than the tariffs themselves. But the tariffs are going to be throwing off a lot of money to this country. And we've been ripped off for years by other countries.
In a few moments, we'll hear from NBC News business and data correspondent Brian Chung. First, let's bring in NBC News Education Rahema Ellis to talk more about these cuts at the Department of Education. Good to have you with us. So what do we know about these cuts? What is the Trump administration saying about why they're doing this right now?
They're following through on a promise that the president made when he campaigned for office, and even in his first term, he made an effort to dismantle the Department of Education. We're talking about about 4,400 employees, and the notice went out to them, to half of them almost, yesterday, that's saying that they were going to be laid off. And today, the Department of Education is not open. The word was that Wednesday it would be shut down, that people would take their laptops from home, laptops with them to home. But if you call the Department of Education, which we'll do a little bit later this morning to find out if anybody will pick up the phone. But what it means, they said, that workers will be placed on administrative leave and starting March 21st for many of them. One of the things we don't know is exactly how some of the jobs that those workers will be doing, where they will be compensated in other places. But Linda McMahon, who is the Secretary of the Department of Education, she had this to say about the move. Take a listen.
What we did today was to take the first step of eliminating what I think is bureaucratic bloat. And that's not to say that a lot of the folks, it's a humanitarian thing too. A lot of the folks that are there, they're out of a job. But we wanted to make sure that we kept all of the right people. We're not taking away education. The president never said that. He's taken the bureaucracy out of education so that more money flows to the states.
And she said that money is still going to go to special education programs and other programs which are very important in the Department of Education, from Title I to how they also administer college funding programs. But the question is, how are you going to do it, and where will it be done, and can you do it with fewer employees?
And it's a huge question a lot of people have because they need those programs right now. What is some of the reaction we're getting from lawmakers, from those in education? Many questioning, like, what's going to be the impact of this, right?
Exactly. Some people are saying that it will have a tremendous impact, first and foremost, on morale of those employees who remain at the Department of Education. And then others are worrying about, are you putting at risk some of the students around the country? There are 50 million public school students. Are you putting them at risk in terms of the services that they'll be receiving? Linda McMahon suggests that that will not happen. There are some others who are saying as long as the funding continues from Congress, that these programs should continue. But again, the question becomes one of how do you administer those programs. But the funding, and I heard no talk of cutting funding. That's critical. If that were to be cut, we'd be having a different story right now.
One of the reasons this is no surprise is because we heard the Trump administration wants to get rid of the Department of Education, but that's not easy. Where does that process stand? What needs to happen for the department to totally go away?
Yeah, you know, the Department of Education was created under Jimmy Carter in 1979, but since then, presidents have been trying to get rid of it. But it's the smallest department of all the cabinet departments in the government. And however, it requires the same thing as the other departments. That is congressional approval. It takes Congress to eliminate it. It takes 60 votes to do that. They've only got 53 Republicans to do it right now. And so many are thinking that you may not get rid of it, but you could diminish the power of the Department of Education in the meantime.
All right, Rahima Ellis, good to have you with us this morning. Thank you so much. Let's focus in on the economy and trade now with Brian Chung. So, Brian, a new day, a new set of tariffs in effect. What's going to be impacted by these steel and aluminum levies?
Yeah, well, any sort of imports that come into the United States that are steel or aluminum from any country around the world, this is industry-based, not country-based, will be hit with that 25% tariff, which means that it will be 25% more expensive for American importers to bring in those raw materials to make a washing machine or to make a vehicle here in the United States. But I want to point out that the stats bear out that the countries that would be most impacted by these tariffs would be our neighbors to the north and south. Canada is the largest importer for both steel and aluminum into the United States. Actually, Mexico also is the second biggest trade partner with the United States on the steel front. And aluminum, can't underscore just how much we bring in from Canada. We brought in 8 times more from Canada than we did for our next trading partner, which was the UAE, in the last year. So again, these are our major trade partners that we're now hitting with this 25% tariff. Jeff.
So for a moment, it looked like these new tariffs were actually going to be even higher for Canada. Just a quick recap of what we've seen this week. Ontario's Premier Doug Ford threatened to impose a 25% surcharge on electricity to the U.S. We talked about that yesterday. Then Mr. Trump threatened a 50% tariff. Everyone then seemed to take a deep breath after Ford spoke with the U.S. Commerce Secretary. Tell us about how all of this played out and just what happens next.
Yeah, well, I mean, look, I was on Wall Street all day yesterday, and it was a roller coaster in the markets because of the headlines around the tariffs. As you mentioned, we started off the day yesterday with the announcement that the Trump administration was going to raise the tariff on steel and aluminum, specifically from Canada, from 25% to 50%. And then later on in the day, we got the de-escalation with the announcement from Doug Ford, the Ontario Premier, in tandem with the Commerce Secretary, Howard Lutnick, announcing that they would be suspending on the Ontario side of things that 25% electricity surcharge to the 3 states of New York, Minnesota, and Michigan. And then later on, after the market closed, we got the announcement from the Trump administration that they would not be raising the tariffs on steel and aluminum from Canada from 25 to 50%, that it would remain at 25%. Again, still substantial, which did take effect. But again, it just underscores that we go through like a month's worth of tariff policy in one day. And this is the kind of the tariff policy approach that we've been seeing from the Trump administration, which is offering no reprieve or solace to any sort of investors that are trying to figure out exactly what's going on.
And then again, as we mentioned, the European Union, again, our allies, retaliating against these latest tariffs with their own measures. Do we know what kind of U.S. goods are being targeted here?
Yeah, the European Union responding very quickly as soon as those steel and aluminum tariffs were put into place, announcing their own tariffs on American imports. They're targeting a wide range of different industries, but some examples that the European Union cited were things like motorbikes as well as boats and alcohol. They specifically cited bourbon from Kentucky. So the EU described these tariffs from the United States on steel and aluminum as, quote, unjustified, although I do want to point out that the amount of imports that we have in terms of steel and aluminum from the European Union is definitely small compared to what we bring in from Mexico and Canada. But nonetheless, the EU also published a list of potential items that they could tariff going forward, and it is 99 pages long. So again, this is just the beginning here, Joe.
That is a long list. Brian, you mentioned you were at the stock market yesterday. We'll be watching it again today. So far, how's this all playing out in the markets overseas and the U.S. futures right now this morning?
Yeah, well, I mean, as all those headlines that I just kind of recapped were happening, there was maybe some optimism that with the de-escalation of the tariff conversation between specifically the United States and Canada, that maybe we would see a green end of the day. Didn't happen. All 3 major indexes ended the day in the red. I'm watching market futures right now. It does imply a market that could open up in the green, But of course, we'll have to see.
All right, Brian Chung, we know you'll be on top of all of it. Thank you so much. Over on Capitol Hill, House Republicans passed a 6-month funding bill with the deadline to avoid a government shutdown quickly approaching. That deadline, Friday night. The vote was mainly along party lines. The bill narrowly passed 217 to 213. One Republican, Kentucky Congressman Thomas Massie, voted against it. Democratic Congressman Jared Golden of Maine voted in favor. The measure now heads to the Senate, where its future is unclear. Following yesterday's vote, House Speaker Mike Johnson took a victory lap.
Well, this was a big vote on the House floor. The Republicans stood together, and we had one Democrat vote with us to do the right thing, and that is to fund the government. This was a clean CR. It freezes funding. It's a responsible thing to do.
For the latest, let's bring in NBC News Capitol Hill correspondent Julie Sirkin. Julie, good morning. So walk us through yesterday's vote. How was the Speaker able to get this through? What was in the final bill that united nearly all House Republicans?
Yeah, good morning, Joe. Nearly all House Republicans, for the exception of Thomas Massie of Kentucky, who's made it very clear at the start of Speaker Johnson's speakership this year that he's going to be on a no on pretty much everything. You see what's in this bill on your screen. It basically maintains status quo spending levels under the last administration. It pluses up defense spending slightly, and it cuts non-defense spending by $13 billion. That last item was part of the reason why Democrats voted against it. They also voted against it because they really didn't have a seat at the table at this process, and it was done by design. Speaker Johnson, President Trump, working the phones, working his members, trying to get all of them lined up behind this interim funding bill, and he had also this to say after it passed. Watch this.
Now that the government funding bill has been passed out of the House, we send it to the Senate, and it falls on the desk of Chuck Schumer. He is the leader of the Democrats on that side, and he must determine whether he wants to fund the government, do the responsible thing, or whether he wants to shut the government down. And I certainly hope that there are enough Democrats in the Senate who have a conscience, who will do the right thing by the American people and take care of business over there.
Johnson's intention this entire time has been to pass this with just Republican votes, and he pretty much did this. One Democrat joined Republicans to pass this through to the Senate, which will certainly put pressure on those Democrats.
All right, so let's talk about how Democrats are reacting to this right now.
Yeah, we heard from Leader Jeffries, the Democratic leader. Remember, he has said that his members will not provide votes for Republicans. He was pretty much right, with the exception of Jared Golden, the one Democrat who joined Republicans in passing this along. Jeffries said that they won't join Republicans in doing this, like I said, in part of the reason because they didn't have a seat at the table. And the biggest reason is because in order to get those hardline Republicans to support this interim funding bill, many of them never vote for stuff like this. Trump and his allies, including Russ Vought, had to tell them that they will claw back or cut future spending. Congress doesn't like the executive branch not spending the funds they already appropriated, and it's why Jeffries had this to say in part. Watch.
It is unacceptable, and that is why there was a strong showing of opposition amongst House Democrats. The partisan Republican spending bill will hurt everyday Americans, and House Democrats will never be complicit in their reckless scheme.
House Democrats made their play. Now all eyes are on the Senate, Joe.
All right, let's talk about that. Maybe the House was the easy part. The Senate, you got a Friday night deadline looming. And unlike the House and the Senate, Republicans do need Democrats, quite a few of them. Where do things stand?
They need 8 of them, and that is also because Senator Rand Paul, who hates CRs, hates these interim spending bills, said he's going to vote against it. John Fetterman, a Democrat, already said he's going to vote for the CR. They need 7 more Democrats. You do have folks from vulnerable states, folks that are up in 2026, and people who represent large populations of federal workers. Democrats are really in a bind here. I asked Chuck Schumer yesterday what they're going to do after a lunch that ran nearly 2 hours, a closed-door meeting the Democrats had. I heard there was a debate in there over how to move forward. This is a big deal for Democrats. Republicans have threatened to shut down the government before. They have shut the government down before. But for Democrats, this is something that they've been beating the drum on for years. I find it very hard to believe still that Democrats will vote to shut it down on Friday, especially with a recess around the corner that I know everybody in the Senate and House really is looking forward to.
All right, Julie, thank you so much. Appreciate it. A hearing for Columbia University graduate Mahmoud Khalil is set to take place this morning. The Palestinian activist was arrested by ICE agents over the weekend, even though he's a permanent legal U.S. resident. Attorneys for Khalil say he will not be present at the hearing, which is happening today in New York. His arrest touched off rallies demanding his release in U.S. cities coast to coast last night. This case is raising legal questions about deporting legal permanent residents of the U.S. It's also raising some free speech issues. NBC News legal analyst Danny Savalos joins us with more on this. So let's talk about today's hearing. It's to challenge his arrest. That's different from perhaps a potential deportation proceeding. So what will we see today? Is it possible he could be released?
It is possible. There are a lot of procedural things going on here. First, there's a petition for habeas. In other words, they're challenging the legality of his detention. But also, they filed a motion to say, hey, you sent him down to Louisiana to one of the facilities down there, and there actually are a few different facilities in Louisiana that hold people who are being prepared for removal. You got to bring him back, they're saying, because you're making it just unbelievably difficult for him to defend his case by simply detaining him and then shooting him off to Louisiana. I can tell you as a criminal defense attorney, having a client incarcerated is a tremendous barrier to representation. Having a client incarcerated 1,000 miles away is tenfold more difficult, especially when it's difficult to contact them. So a couple different things could be happening today, but the district court has the power to at least stop these proceedings until jurisdiction and other issues are determined.
Let's talk about the immigration side of this. Khalil is a green card holder, a permanent U.S. resident. Does that mean it's safe to assume his free speech rights are protected by the Constitution here?
Yes, they are. But green card holders are subject to a number of additional laws and additional reasons why their green card can be revoked. The most common ones that we as criminal defense attorneys are aware of are if you get convicted of a crime. Now, the definition of the crime that qualifies causes lots of confusions, but that's probably not the basis we're going to see here. We're probably going to see the less often invoked basis of national security concerns, whether that be assisting a foreign terrorist organization, espionage, something along those lines. Espionage, probably not. But some of those other areas are a little more squishy, like providing material support to a foreign terrorist organization. That might be a little easier bar for the government to clear, and it is the government's burden to make that showing.
So the law does allow for the government to deport non-citizens, even green card holders, in certain circumstances. So what does the Trump administration have to prove here to get there?
It depends which way they elect to go, but most likely the indications are now they're going to use the national security exceptions, or I should say the reasons, justifications for revocation of a green card. There are several different reasons. Believe it or not, and this was a surprise to me, I don't know if this has ever been invoked. If you're on public assistance, that can be a reason for terminating or revoking your green card status. I don't know that that's ever actually used, but the point is there are a number of different reasons under the INA, the statute that controls, that allows for revocation of green cards. There are the versions that we deal with all the time in criminal court, which are criminal convictions for a felony or some other kind of crime. But there are other reasons, too, that are less often invoked, and national security is one of them. And even though the government has the burden, the challenge here is going to be that these definitions are a little bit nebulous.
We should note any formal charges against Khalil are still pending. If he does end up facing charges for his involvement in these pro-Palestinian demonstrations at Columbia University, is that something that could be used on other foreign students who take part in similar demonstrations down the road?
Well, yes, of course. Any criminal conviction potentially involves a loss of green card, loss of status, and, of course, after that, removal. But as we've seen under the statute, they don't need a criminal conviction. There are other grounds, national security grounds, that can be used to justify revocation of the green card. But the easiest is always criminal charges. I mean, I've had that with my own clients. The challenge is the federal statute defines what criminal charges apply. But when you're in all the 50 states and the federal government, you have to figure out, well, does this fit the definition? The government might even just bypass that issue and just go to a national security concern. I don't believe they need a criminal conviction in order to get there.
All right, a lot of legal issues to discuss here, Danny. We appreciate you having you here to explain it all for us. The Secretary of Transportation is ordering immediate and permanent changes at Washington's Reagan National Airport. Now, this stems from the investigation into January's mid-air crash there. An Army helicopter and passenger jet collided, killing 67 people. As NBC News senior correspondent Tom Costello reports, the investigation has revealed a stunning number of close calls at that airport.
6 weeks since the midair crash between an Army helicopter and an American Airlines regional jet. The new transportation secretary announced he is permanently limiting helicopter flights around Washington, D.C. And the FAA will roll out artificial intelligence to identify close call trends nationwide.
We're going to make sure we've learned from this air disaster, and we're going to pay it forward so there's not other families that have to go through the pain and anguish of losing a loved one.
It comes as the NTSB reported a staggering number of close calls at Reagan National, with choppers flying down the Potomac River right off runway 33. Between October 2021 and December of 24, 15,214 close proximity events between planes and helicopters. 85 were very close, less than 200 feet vertical separation. And from 2011 to 2024, at least one automated cockpit collision avoidance warning every month. In more than half, the helicopter may have been flying above the 200-foot limit. The NTSB chair says the distances allowed between planes and choppers were dangerous.
They pose an intolerable risk to aviation safety.
Sam Lilly was the first officer on the regional jet.
The legacy for Sam is going to be, obviously, that we're going to find ways to reduce the probability of this ever happening to hopefully close to zero.
Secretary Duffy also calling on Congress to spend tens of billions of dollars now, expediting the process to upgrade the nation's antiquated air traffic control system. Back to you.
Tom, thank you so much. The West Coast is bracing for another round of rain and snow. Let's get a check on your morning news now. Weather meteorologist Angie Lastman is tracking the system for us. Angie, good morning.
Hello, Joe. We've got a busy couple of days ahead of us with this storm system. First up, though, it's the West Coast that's going to get in on some of that kind of impactful weather through the day today. We've already got 21 million people under flood alerts across parts of Southern California, and you can see the rain already ramping up. And this is going to be stretched not just across parts of California, but for the entirety of the Pacific Northwest and stretching, of course, south of that. We've got the rain heavy at times, the wind and the snow all on the table for folks across this region. And the flood threat is going to be something that we see through the day today across parts of California, specifically as we know those burn scar areas. By tomorrow, this system works a little farther to the east and spreads that snow over parts of the Great Basin. We'll also see some of the heaviest of the rain focused across the desert southwest. And it's still on the move even as we get into Friday. Then it's going to start to bring some of the snow to parts of the Rockies. We'll see some rain across parts of the Midwest, as well as the Mississippi Valley getting in on the potential for some severe weather. So a couple of busy days for us ahead thanks to this system. Today, though, watching for that slight risk across Southern California when it comes to flash flooding. We know that the burn scar areas are going to be problematic. We've got the mudslides, the rock slides all on the table. Los Angeles stretching up into Santa Barbara. Rainfall amounts through tomorrow, upwards of maybe 3 inches in some spots. So good amount of rain, short amount of time. Already with the topography being difficult, we could see that be an issue. Now, Sierra Mountains, they're going to pick up some additional snow, too, from this. We've got 3 to maybe even 4 feet in some of the highest locations that we could see. Now, looking ahead, though, to Friday, this is when we see a large chunk of the country under the potential of severe risk. We've got 39 million people already under the severe threat here as we get into the end of our work week. Wind gusts, tornadoes, all on the table. And this is going to be something we see, Joe, into Saturday and even Sunday as this system continues to work east. So busy, as spring normally is with severe weather outbreaks.
All kinds of weather going on. All right, Angie, thank you so much. Much more to come here on Morning News Now. Later this hour on The Rocks, President Trump's trade war causing problems for a key American export. We're going to take you to Kentucky, where bourbon makers are already seeing profits slide. Up first after the break, ready for peace. Ukraine agreeing to a 30-day ceasefire with Russia in a plan backed by the U.S. Now the question, how will Moscow respond? We'll have the latest next. Welcome back. After a day of lengthy talks between U.S. and Ukrainian officials in Saudi Arabia, Ukraine has agreed to a proposed 30-day ceasefire in its war with Russia. Secretary of State Marco Rubio said the ball is now in Moscow's court as relations between Ukraine and the Trump administration appear to be on the mend. But Russia may not be on the same page. An influential Russian lawmaker said today a ceasefire would be on Moscow's terms, not Washington's. NBC News chief international correspondent Keir Simmons has details on yesterday's meeting between the U.S. and Ukraine.
In what could be a significant step towards peace, Ukraine agreeing to President Trump's proposal for a 30-day ceasefire. with the president turning the spotlight on Russia, announcing he will speak to President Putin.
Hopefully President Putin will agree to that also, and we can get this show on the road.
Secretary of State Rubio leading the talks in Saudi Arabia, also saying Russia must make the next move.
Ball's now in their court. If they say no, then we'll unfortunately know what the impediment is to peace here.
It's a reset for Ukraine, but at a cost. After that diplomatic disaster in the Oval Office, where President Zelensky insisted on U.S. security guarantees.
You're gambling with World War III.
Proposal statement commits to guaranteeing Ukrainian prosperity and security. It does not say how. But the U.S. will resume intelligence sharing and military aid for Ukraine. The largest ever Ukrainian drone attack against Moscow, matched by another Russian onslaught, the latest in an escalating Kremlin campaign. A day of war and peace talks, ending with Ukraine's President Zelensky declaring if Russia agrees, silence will take effect immediately. But whether Russia will agree depends on President Putin and President Trump's appetite to pressure him the way he has pushed President Zelensky.
All right, Keir, thank you so much. Greenland closed out its election yesterday with the opposition party coming out on top. NBC News reporter Matt Bodner joins us from London with details on that election and some other international headlines. Matt, good morning.
Joe, good morning. Greenland's center-right Democrat Tea Party has won a surprise victory in parliamentary elections. This, of course, is an upset to the status quo of the nation's politics that have held for many years now. This election took place in a historic context. President Trump continues to openly daydream about annexing Greenland in one capacity or another. Greenland is a Danish holding, and Democrat Tea, like most political parties in Greenland, is pro-independence. Its leader is on record telling Trump his nation is not for sale. Moving along now to the United Kingdom, authorities have arrested the captain of the Portuguese-flagged cargo vessel So Long, which collided with U.S.-flagged tanker Stella Immaculate on Monday. So Long was traveling at a speed of 16 knots when it collided with Stella Immaculate, which was at anchor off the Yorkshire coast. 16 knots, for the record, is fast in this context. The arrest of So Long's captain is based on suspicion of gross negligence manslaughter. Beyond an entirely avoidable collision, one of his crew members is sadly still missing and at this point presumed dead. These are cold waters. Meanwhile, the ship's owner has told NBC News that the captain is a Russian national. We'll wrap up this hour at the Vatican. Another health update on Pope Francis overnight, with the Vatican saying he remains in stable condition. The Pope continued oxygen therapy throughout the day on Tuesday. His doctors did say there's a slight improvement in his situation, though the medical situation remains complex. The latest release also noted that today is the 67th anniversary of the Pope's induction into the Society of Jesus, better known as the Jesuits. Back to you.
All right, Matt, thank you so much for the update there. Breaking news, a spokesperson for the Loudoun County, Virginia Sheriff's Office tells NBC News a person of interest has been named in the disappearance of a college student in the Dominican Republic. The Sheriff's Office has no jurisdiction in this case, but its detectives are assisting local investigators. The 20-year-old student from the University of Pittsburgh vanished while on a spring break trip last week. We're now seeing new security video from the moments just before she disappeared. NBC News correspondent Jesse Kirsch reports from Punta Cana.
One moment, Sudiksha Kunanki was walking with friends, and the next, she was gone.
That's Kunanki.
The Dominican Republic's National Police confirm this surveillance video shows Kunanki just before she disappeared last Thursday. The University of Pittsburgh student was staying at this Punta Cana resort when she was part of a group that headed toward the beachfront around 4:15 a.m. Investigators say the 20-year-old's friends returned to their resort around 40 minutes later, but Kunanki stayed behind with at least one other person. Her friends then spent the day on an excursion. Roughly 12 hours went by before they realized she was missing and told the hotel. The Dominican military scouring the area overhead and underwater.
By day, spring break's still on at this resort. People tanning, enjoying a swim. But overnight, police tell us at least twice they've had a team out here watching to see how the water moves to know where a body might have drifted if someone drowned.
Dominican Republic's president says one of the last people with Kunanki reported they were both hit by a wave. Investigators also say the last person known to have been with Kunanki on the beach, a 24-year-old man, has changed his story over time. And hours after Kunanki's friends returned to the hotel, he came back alone.
Police telling us they found no signs of blood or violence on the beach. Meanwhile, Kunanki's family telling NBC News today they're, quote, experiencing a lot of sadness and pain. The family asking for privacy as the search continues. Back to you.
All right, Jesse, thank you. Coming up, it has been billed as a way to help smokers quit. Well, researchers say e-cigs could be doing the opposite. Dr. John Torres joins us to break down their findings in our weekly checkup. Plus, fired while pregnant, expectant mothers losing their jobs in the efforts to cut the federal workforce. A look at the added challenges they now face. That's next on Morning News Now. It is time for our weekly medical checkup. Today, we're looking at some simple swaps that could boost your heart health and help with weight loss, like choosing plant-based oils over butter. Plus, new research challenging the idea that vaping helps smokers quit. In fact, it might be making it even harder. NBC News medical contributor Dr. John Torres joins us to discuss these health headlines. Good to have you with us. So let's start with butter. Butter. We all love it, but I guess there's research from Boston that says that the more of it you eat, the less of it you eat, the longer you might live. This isn't terribly surprising, but what should we know about this?
You're right, it's not surprising.
What can you replace it with?
And these are very simple swaps we're talking about, this and the next thing we're going to talk about. And essentially what they did is they looked at 200,000 people for 30 years, they followed them, and they found the ones that ate more butter ended up dying more prematurely than the ones that didn't eat butter. And instead of butter, they substituted them for some of these healthy oils we're talking about, canola oil, soy oil, those types of things. And they ended up, again, living longer. So what does that mean for you here? And what are the doctor's orders? Well, the doctor's orders are essentially make those simple swaps. Doesn't mean you have to give up butter. What it means instead is, every now and then say, butter's not a regular thing we should be doing every day. Swap it out for some of these oils once in a while, or just do without the butter, and that can certainly help you live longer. Just essentially, this is something we talk about all the time. Eat better, live longer.
There you go. Imagine that. All right, but it sounds so easy.
It does.
It's so hard sometimes. Let's stick on the diet theme here. We talk about animal products, but you can trade a cheeseburger for a veggie burger, and it actually will help with weight loss?
It will. It'll help with a few things. Metabolism, weight loss, these cardiometabolic measures we talk about, cholesterol, things like that. The surprising thing in this study was what they found out about processed foods and ultra-processed foods. And they found out that eating those plant-based foods, I don't think this is a surprise to anybody, can help with these different measures. But even the ultra-processed ones that we're talking about are better than the meat options on a regular basis. And in this study, they found out that people who went for these vegan, vegetarian diets, even if they were ultra-processed food, ended up having less calories, they ended up losing weight, they ended up feeling better, the whole thing. So what are the doctor's orders here? Well, the doctor's orders are, again, those simple swaps we're talking about. Try other proteins, try these, even the ultra-processed type plant-based foods can certainly help out. And if you want to go, whole on this thing, look at beans, lentils, seeds, nuts, tofu, those kinds of things can certainly make your life healthier.
A reminder, there are so many other types of protein out there that we can,
exactly.
We can give try. All right, we've been teasing this one all morning. Researchers at UC San Diego found vaping doesn't help smokers quit. In fact, it might actually be doing the opposite. What did they find?
And, when vaping first came out, it was touted as a replacement for cigarettes, and then you could eventually get off cigarettes. It's a way to quit smoking. And over the years, we found out that's not necessarily true, and this is one more study showing that. In this study, they looked at smokers, and they said, let's compare smokers who continued to smoke to those who smoked and vaped to see if the vaping helped them get off cigarettes. What they found out instead was just the opposite. Those that vaped were less likely to quit cigarettes than those who simply just smoked. And it was one of those studies, again, that we're looking at it as we get more detail. We understand a little bit more about vaping. So what are doctor's orders here? Well, doctor's orders are essentially the best thing we found out. The best way to quit smoking is to continue to try to quit smoking. So you can use aids like 1-800-QUIT-NOW. They can certainly help you with counseling. They can help you with nicotine patches, those types of things. And the patches, the gum, and lozenges, those things can certainly help. Looking at this study, vaping is not one of those things that can help. It might actually make it worse.
It is so hard if you have someone in your family who's struggled with trying to quit. We know how hard it is,
exactly.
But it's good to have this research to guide us. Dr. Torres, good to have you with us. Thanks so much. Thousands of former federal employees are in limbo this morning after the Trump administration issued those mass firings over the past few weeks, with more expected today. It's part of aggressive efforts spearheaded by Doge leader Elon Musk to slash the nation's budget. Well, the stakes are even higher for now former employees who are pregnant. A new NBC News report takes a look at the challenges those women face, all while preparing to give birth. NBC News senior reporter Jane Timms spoke to 6 of those pregnant women who recently lost their jobs and joins us now. Jane, really fascinating report here. I know one of these women is abroad, had traveled to Jordan while pregnant. What did they all tell you about their experiences right now?
Yeah, some of the things that made these women very good at their jobs, like living abroad, being willing to travel on a moment's notice to handle humanitarian crisis for USAID, now find that that's why they won't be able to get any kind of family leave for themselves. The woman I spoke to lives abroad and therefore doesn't qualify for family aid here in the U.S. or family aid benefits in the home country where she lives because she has been laid off from this job. This is a story that I heard time and time again, women who found that their jobs sort of very quickly disappeared and took with them a lot of their security, their financial freedoms, and made them really very anxious about these pregnancies, which were all very, very planned and very wanted and very important to them.
And of course, for many of these women who are 6, 7, 8 months pregnant, I know they told you it's hard to get a new job right now because they're about to have a baby. I mean, what is the biggest concern for these women and many other federal employees who've lost their jobs?
Yeah, finances were the big one. Many women told me, how do you go and apply for a job when you're 30 weeks pregnant? You can't hide this. I can't sit for an interview without the interviewer knowing that I'm pregnant. They also said they were very worried about their health insurance. That was a #1 thing that came up. People saying, I have an appointment on Tuesday. How am I going to make sure I can pay for a fetal echocardiogram, which is not a cheap or short procedure? And then the other one was maternity leave. I spoke with one woman who had spent years saving up her PTO to extend her maternity leave, and she'll leave that on the table when she departs from the agency next month because she said PTO is capped, so I can take sort of the maximum cap, but I had hundreds of hours saved to bond with this baby and take care of this child when they come.
We keep hearing and reading about these stories day after day. What is the White House saying about the impact these mass layoffs are having on American citizens? Many of them voted for President Trump.
You know, we have a statement we can put on the screen of what the White House told me about this. But broadly, they're saying that it's difficult to make the kind of cuts that President Trump promised. That it's just this is a hard thing to do, to cut government waste and bloat. But for these women, it feels very personal and it feels very intimate for them.
And Jane, for pregnant workers who did lose their jobs, do they have any legal options?
None of the women I spoke to felt like they had any legal options to go. Some of them didn't even want to speak on the record because they know that their ability to get hired is affected. And they said, I don't maybe want to advertise that I'm pregnant right now if I'm looking for a job. But for the USAID workers in particular that I spoke to, they said the humanitarian industry has been so decimated by these cuts, they're not even sure they're going to get work in their industry.
All right. You can check out Jane's full report at NBCnews.com. Jane Tim, thanks so much for joining us this morning. We appreciate it. Coming up, low spirits up next. We're going to take you to Kentucky for a look at one of the casualties of the trade war, why bourbon distilleries are already seeing sales slump. Plus, creating community in the online world. We're going to look at the impact of digital spaces for LGBTQ plus community, with one organization looking to make them even more supportive. You're watching Morning News Now. Welcome back. Alcohol is now on the growing list of U.S. product industries suffering the effects of President Trump's trade war. Several Canadian provinces ordered American-made liquor be removed from store shelves. NBC's Maggie Vespa spoke to some spirit makers in Kentucky where iconic whiskey and bourbon distilleries are already seeing their profits dwindle.
At Michter's Distillery in Louisville, iconic Kentucky bourbon is distilled, aged, bottled, and shipped to more than 80 countries. Their largest foreign market, Canada, where most provinces are now defiantly pulling American liquor from store shelves.
It's definitely caused a hit to our business.
Andrea Wilson is Michter's chief operating officer.
Orders have been canceled. That's the reality of it.
Already orders have been canceled.
Yes, we have $115,000 of product sitting.
That product is just sitting here in Michter's warehouse with Canada-specific labels on these bottles in English and in French. They don't know what to do with this, and if nothing changes, they fear their losses will grow. The timing couldn't be worse for many American whiskey producers. One study showing the industry recently saw a nearly 2% drop in revenue. Amid the slowdown, the CEO of Jack Daniel's parent company called Canada's product pull worse than a tariff because it's literally taking your sales away.
I don't sleep right now.
You don't sleep right now?
I don't sleep.
At Bro Brothers Distillery, Victor Yarbrough is in the middle of building a massive new tasting room. That expansion banking on a deal to start selling spirits in Canada. That deal now dead. He's scrambling to find a plan B.
Maybe they'll take 5% of that. Maybe India will take 10% of that.
But he worries any export plan feels like a risk in an industry with profits already going down the drain.
It could be a country we're speaking with right now until all of a sudden you guys are going to get hit with tariffs next, and then that deal falls through. So it's a constant uncertainty.
Maggie Vespa, NBC News, Louisville, Kentucky.
State media in China is reporting that Walmart met with government officials in Beijing to discuss prices in an era of trade uncertainty. CNBC's Savannah Henao has that and some other financial headlines. Savannah, good morning.
Hey, Joe, good morning to you. Yeah, so Chinese state media says government officials met with Walmart yesterday to discuss reports the U.S. retailer asked Chinese suppliers to slash prices to offset the cost of U.S. tariffs on goods from China. Last week, Bloomberg reported certain Chinese suppliers, including makers of kitchenware and clothing, had been asked to lower prices by as much as 10% per round of tariffs, which would essentially shift the full cost of the tariffs onto them. Walmart and China's Commerce Ministry have declined comment. Hedge fund billionaire Ray Dalio is warning America's mounting debt, which stands at $36 trillion, could have a major disruptive impact on the global economy. Dalio telling CNBC at the Converge Live conference in Singapore, the U.S. has a very severe supply-demand problem that the government has to sell a large amount of debt the world isn't going to want to buy. Dalio also says tariffs and the escalating global trade war could lead to fighting between countries, although he stresses that wouldn't necessarily mean a military standoff. And Amazon, Google, and Meta are joining a call by the energy industry for governments and utility companies to expand the use of nuclear power. They're signing a pledge to support the goal of tripling capacity by 2050. Amazon has invested more than $1 billion in the nuclear industry in the past year. Since the COP28 conference 2 years ago, 8 new nuclear reactors have been connected to global power grids, and ground has been broken on a dozen more, Joe.
All right, Savannah, thank you so much. Sure. This morning, we're bringing you the first look at a new study about the critical role digital communities play in the lives of young people in the LGBTQ+ community. The report was released today by Hope Labs and the Born This Way Foundation. It shows nearly half of young people feel very safe expressing their identities online, compared with just around 1 in 10 in person. Many people surveyed said online platforms gave them more control over their interactions and that their online friendships were, quote, life-saving. One teen said, without online spaces, I wouldn't be here today. Gen Z mental health advocate Jorge Alvarez is here to talk about the impact of having safe digital spaces, and Claudia Santi Fernandez has more details from the report. She's the Vice President of Research and Evaluation for the Born This Way Foundation. Thank you so much for joining us this morning for this important conversation. Claudia, I'm going to start with you. In addition to what we just mentioned about feeling safer, what respondents said their online friends were around twice as supportive as family members. Talk more about that.
Sure, I'd love to. Well, this is corroborated by the research that's out there that says that peer relationships are so important, and that's online and that's in person. And importantly, what young people shared in our report was that those who would be the most beneficial in reading the report were parents and families. So they want to call them in to be a part of this process and read it, learn about their recommendations, their suggestions, and really listen to what they are saying.
So there are pros and cons, of course, to online spaces, Jorge. The survey also found more than 1 in 3 young people still experienced bullying or teasing online in the last year because of their identity. And I guess that's not super surprising. Let's talk about what needs to be done to address that. I assume concerns are high when you look at the major social media platforms actually pulling back on some of the things that actually try and prevent some of that bullying, right?
No, absolutely. So first and foremost, I think what's really important is that these platforms do a better job and continue to show up for young people by listening and then ultimately responding. So by asking the same question that you're asking me right here today, I also think we're seeing an unprecedented moment where a lot of educational and critical content that makes young people, especially LGBTQ youth and young people, feel really seen and heard. We're seeing that content, that educational and sincere content being censored. And so I think what's really important is that we create more opportunities for the right content, that positive content, to be uplifted. So that way young people have access to the critical life-saving tools and resources that can be amplified through social media.
Because through that, so many lives can be saved if you get the right information out there. Claudia, another safety concern is the potential for government restrictions on LGBTQ plus affirming content that's posted online. There was an overwhelming majority of young people worried about what their government is doing on the state and federal level that could limit access to online communities. Talk about what kind of legislation we're seeing here, what the worry is.
Well, when young people are concerned about the legislation and they're concerned about how it's impacting their lives, it's important to listen to them then even more. And so our process with this research survey was to include young people in it at every stage and step of the way. So, for example, they co-created the survey with us to develop the questions. And then we asked over 1,200 young people from the LGBTQ community, the questions that we had, the 67 questions. After we looked over the data and we made sure that it was informed by their lived experiences. And then lastly, what we did, and what's very important, and I hope everyone pays attention to this, including legislators, we asked them to review the data and review our findings and give us actionable strategies. So things like content moderation, things like, including LGBTQ-friendly sites online. These are things that they are asking for, and we need to ensure that we're listening.
And do you get if there's one thing that can be done right now, what would you want it to be?
Become an active ally. That is what they asked for us. And so you can do that by reading this report, listening to their perspectives, and taking action with their recommendations in mind.
Jorge, this survey shines a light on why it is so important for LGBTQ plus youth to have these safe spaces online, but elaborate on why this is so important, especially right now.
Definitely. Well, first, I think becoming an ally and ensuring that, again, you are acting on what young people are saying is so critical, and I want to amplify that time and time again. But to answer your question directly, I think right now, regardless of identity, whether you identify as LGBTQ+, whether you are a first-gen college grad, Black, Indigenous, Latine, these digital spaces are essentially a lifeline, are a safe space, a refuge for a lot of young adults who, quite frankly, don't have access to safe community, mentors, advocates in their lives that they can lean on. And so ultimately, I think what's really important is that we think of these spaces as, really unique hubs for community, and that needs to be protected 100%.
All right, Jorge Alvarez and Claudia Santi Fernandez, thank you for your time this morning and for talking about the results of this important survey. We really appreciate your time. All right.
Thank you so much.
Coming up, a big statue causing even bigger problems. When we return, we're going to take you to Southern California, where this massive tribute to Marilyn Monroe, well, it's now the center of a lawsuit. We'll be right back. Finally this hour, a massive statue of one Hollywood icon is causing some controversy in California. This sculpture of Marilyn Monroe, which is taller than the average two-story house, used to stand in front of the Palm Springs Art Museum. But now one lawsuit and hundreds of thousands of dollars later, it has a new home. NBC's Liz Kreutz has more on the mixed reviews from some locals.
In the resort town of Palm Springs, it isn't politics dividing the city. It's something much bigger. This 26-foot-tall, 17-ton statue of Marilyn Monroe.
Would you ever have thought Marilyn would cause such a stir?
No, I don't think very few people thought that.
Depending on who you ask, the massive replica of the 1950s star is either a beloved piece of art and photo op.
This is going to be the Eiffel Tower of Palm Springs.
Or an eyesore.
I don't consider it art. I consider it a tourist attraction.
Blocking traffic, according to a lawsuit filed by a group of residents, and most notably to fashion designer Trina Turk, ruining the aesthetic outside the Palm Springs Art Museum, where Marilyn has been the last 3 years.
We believe the mid-century modern architecture of Palm Springs is really one of the most important tourist attractions. We don't think it should be blocked by a 26-foot statue on a 2-foot plinth.
Now, for some of the folks who are against this statue, it's not just that she's blocking the view of the art museum. It's also about the other view.
It's absurd that you're going to leave the museum and see the backside of someone's underpants from any era.
Peggy Trott chairs the hotel group that bought the controversial sculpture.
If there was a Da Vinci there, would people want that covered up? I don't necessarily believe it was ever about underwear.
Whatever it is about, a court decision was made. Marilyn must move. $500,000 to relocate her to a park less than 100 feet away.
I think she finally found her permanent home.
Slightly out of sight now, but hopefully more accepted. Liz Price, NBC News, Palm Springs.
All right, that is going to do it for this hour of morning news now. Stay with us, though. The news continues. Good morning, I'm Joe Fryer. Savannah is on assignment. Right now on Morning News Now, new escalation in President Trump's trade showdown with some of America's top global allies. The commander-in-chief staunchly defending those long-promised tariffs on steel and aluminum imports that went into effect overnight. It's a move that's been shaking up investors on Wall Street all week, and it all comes as lawmakers on Capitol Hill take a critical step toward averting yet another looming government shutdown. But it's not a done deal just yet. And amid all that tariff turmoil, we're getting the latest read on America's fight against inflation this morning. We're going to break down where Americans are already feeling the pinch of higher prices coming up. Also this morning, intolerable risk. Major safety changes coming to D.C.'s Reagan Airport in the wake of that deadly midair disaster there. The shocking new federal report calling for airtight restrictions across some of the nation's busiest runways. Plus, down to earth, after more than 9 months in space, astronauts Sunny Williams and Butch Wilmore are finally set to come home. Later in the hour, we've got everything you need to know about the long-awaited NASA mission now ready to launch in just a few short hours. Let's start this hour in Washington. Overnight, another round of President Trump's tariffs went into effect. This time, it's on all steel and aluminum imports. The president had threatened to double the 25% tariff for Canada after Ontario's Premier Doug Ford announced plans to tax electricity supplied to a few U.S. states. But the president backed down after Ford spoke with U.S. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick. All this comes after the Department of Education said it was cutting its workforce in half, a first step in trying to shut down the department altogether. NBC News senior White House correspondent Garrett Haight has the very latest.
President Trump campaigned on the idea of returning responsibility for education to the states. And now his administration is taking a big step towards making that a reality, rolling out deep cuts to the DOE's workforce here in Washington and around the country. And it comes as those new tariffs snapped into effect last night, throwing trading partners, allies, and many U.S. businesses further off balance.
This morning, a drastic change to the Department of Education. The Trump administration planning to cut the staff of the agency in half. DOE workers ordered to stay home today, with some 1,300 career employees expected to be terminated. The new education secretary says the president's ultimate goal is to shut down the agency, but that would require an act of Congress.
What we did today was to take the first step of eliminating what I think is bureaucratic bloat.
The Department of Education says it serves over 50 million students across the country. Its staff working on programs from student loans to anti-discrimination laws and campus safety. The head of the advocacy group, the National Education Association, saying, quote, "The real victims will be our most vulnerable students." It comes as President Trump made a show of support for the head of his administration's cost-cutting program, Tesla's CEO Elon Musk. The president displaying Teslas on the White House South Lawn as the company's stock struggles during the general market turmoil this week, with investors still concerned about a possible recession, which the president shrugged off yesterday.
I don't see it at all. I think this country is going to boom.
And overnight, Trump putting in place promised 25% tariffs on steel and aluminum imports from around the world.
We've been ripped off for years by other countries.
Most of the United States imported steel, and nearly all of its aluminum comes from Canada. The two countries avoided more escalation yesterday after Trump threatened heavier tariffs after a Canadian politician briefly taxed electricity in 3 U.S. states, both sides eventually backing down.
Let's work together. Cooler heads have to prevail here.
The tariffs weighing heavily on many businesses, like D.C.'s Right Proper Brewing Company, which gets aluminum beer cans from Canada.
How much does any small disruption potentially throw you guys off?
It could be massive. Roughly, if we were to incur a 25% increase in that cost, it would be about over $40,000 for us, which is the cost of an employee.
The European Union responding forcefully to those new tariffs overnight with what they call a proportionate response, placing tariffs on $28 billion of American goods. The South Korean government said it would go into emergency response mode to review how it will act. And China, which is not a big exporter of steel or aluminum to the U.S., said it would take all necessary measures to protect its industries.
All right, Garrett, thank you so much. With just days to go before Friday's deadline, House Republicans have passed a funding bill aimed at avoiding a potential government shutdown. It was a 217 to 213 vote, with the bill narrowly passing yesterday in the House. One Republican voted against the measure, while one Democrat voted in favor of the bill. Now heads to the Senate, where it faces an uncertain future. NBC News Chief Capitol Hill correspondent Ryan Nobles joins us now from Washington with the latest. Ryan, good morning. So it was a narrow vote yesterday in the House, as expected. House Speaker Mike Johnson said Republicans stood together to pass the funding bill along with that one Democrat. Walk us through what happened on the House floor and what ultimately ended up in this measure.
Yeah, I mean, the speaker is right, Joe, and I think there were a lot of people who did not predict that this would ultimately be the outcome, in part because conservative House Republicans have been so opposed to these types of short-term spending measures in the past. They think that this is a bad way to budget. They think it's part of the reason that the budget deficit and the ultimate United States overall debt has ballooned over a certain period of time. But Donald Trump was the difference here, right? He went to these House Freedom Caucus members and said to them, you need to give me a win here. And if we get over this hump, then I will help get us to a place where we can actually budget in a way where the federal budget in the federal government in general is greatly reduced. Whether or not he's going to be able to make good on that promise is something we're going to have to watch very closely over the next year or so. But at least in this short-term sense, Mike Johnson got what he needed, and every single Republican, save for one, voted yes. That was enough to get it over the finish line. And now it's going to be in the Democrats' court as to whether or not the government stays open on Friday as this bill moves to the Senate. Joe.
Yeah, let's talk about the Senate, because unlike the House, Republicans do need Democrats in the Senate. So what are we watching for this week?
Yeah, in the Senate, it requires a supermajority in order to pass. That means 60 votes. So at least 8 Democrats would have to join every single Republican in order to pass this bill. And this is a very difficult decision for Democrats. There's a lot that they have to weigh as to whether or not that this is something that they want to support. Fundamentally, they don't like this bill. They think there's a lot of problems with it. They don't think that it really solves the problems that the federal government needs to address. But at the same time, they realize that if they take the dramatic step of voting to shut down the government, that there could be much bigger impacts. They're already worried about the way that federal government workers have been treated during this early part of the Trump administration. If they then go into a government shutdown, many of these government workers could be furloughed. That could give Elon Musk an excuse to create even more job cuts. There will also be frontline military workers that will not receive pay. People will have to show up to work without getting paid. Democrats don't want to be responsible for that. So they're trying to weigh the pros and cons of standing up to the Trump administration, which their base really wants them to do, against the real world impacts of a shutdown that could happen as soon as Friday.
Ryan, let's talk about Republican Kentucky Congressman Thomas Massie. He was that one Republican who voted against the legislation. Not a surprise, not the first time he's voted against the Trump agenda. The president said on social media he now wants to find a primary opponent to challenge Massie next year. But a fellow House Republican is coming to his defense. Explain what's going on here.
Yeah, I mean, Tom Massie is a purist. He believes that the way the federal government budgets is very wrong. He believes that national debt is one of our biggest national security threats. And he said He always votes against continuing resolutions, and despite the pressure from Donald Trump, that wasn't going to change. Now, Massey has had MAGA challengers before in his very red Kentucky district. He's won every single time. He doesn't appear to be threatened by the idea of a Donald Trump primary. And furthermore, he feels that if he were to primary and lose, he'd rather stand on his principles and lose that primary than change the way he feels about it. So this will be a test case, though, Joe, as to whether or not any Republican has the ability to stand up to Donald Trump if a primary does, in fact, manifest itself. But we should point out that Speaker Johnson still supports Thomas Massey despite this no vote.
All right, Ryan, thank you so much. And as Congress weighs these massive federal spending cuts, we're taking a closer look at how trimming government assistance programs like Medicaid and SNAP could impact the people who rely on them to make ends meet. That includes some voters who live in House Speaker Mike Johnson's district in southwestern Louisiana. NBC News Capitol Hill correspondent Melanie Zanona traveled to a local food bank in the rural town of Vinton, which has been hit hard by hurricanes and rising costs in recent years. She spoke with some of Johnson's constituents, like Angel Lejeune, who visits the food bank every Tuesday to pick up staples for 6 different families.
How important is this for the people that you're picking up for to get this food every week?
Oh, it's very important. They, like I said, they lost their jobs, lost their homes, lost their cars, lost everything, basically. And then this is what they depend on to eat. So I'm here every week. A lot of people depend on these things, a lot.
And Melanie Zanona joins us now from Vinton, Louisiana. Mel, good to have you with us. So let's recap here. The Congressional Budget Office put out that report last week that said cuts to Medicaid will have to be on the menu if Republicans want to meet their goals of slashing $880 billion in government spending. Talk about how those cuts would work and how they would impact a small town like Vinton.
Yeah, well, any cuts to Medicaid or SNAP, which is food stamps, would be devastating to the community here. In talking to some of the people who actually live here, this is a really small and rural town. A lot of people rely on government assistance to help make ends meet. And I also talked to people who said they are really struggling right now with the cost of goods and groceries, which is why they go to this weekly food bank. I talked to Pastor Don Snyder of Christian Life Church. He's one of the people who founded this food bank. He said it's a very poor area and that the need is so great that every single child in schools gets signed up for free lunches automatically. Now, the GOP leadership has said that they're not going to actually cut Medicaid, but one of the things they are looking into is instituting work requirements for able-bodied adults. But here in Vinton, I talked to people who said that would just be very difficult and have a huge impact because there's not a lot of job opportunity. As you can see, I'm standing in downtown Vinton right now, and there's a number of businesses that have been shuttered. They say there's not a lot of industry here, and there's not a lot of transportation to take them to other job opportunities. So work requirements would have a massive impact, even though that is not necessarily a cut itself.
You know, Mel, it is our jobs to follow every step of what's going on in Washington, but most folks are busy. Do people you're speaking with seem to be following what's going on in Congress right now?
Some of the people I spoke to absolutely were following what is happening in Congress in Washington, and some of them said they were very fearful of what might happen. Take a listen.
I am very much aware, and my children are on Medicaid. So yes, I do fear that very much. And they make it to where insurance isn't really affordable with our companies. And my company doesn't even provide insurance. So we don't have many options.
My grandson receives some assistance from the state.
So how important is it to have these additional resources to help you take care of it?
Oh, I don't know what we would do without him. I really don't. It's been tough. I appreciate what Doge is doing, but I feel it's Congress's decision. The final decision needs to come from Congress.
I would tell them to help us out. Help us. People are hurting out here. And you may be from Louisiana, but you're the House Speaker. Cross the aisles, do whatever you got to do. You know, work together. That's my message.
Now, this is a very red Republican district in a very red state. And some of the people I spoke to said they voted for Speaker Mike Johnson in the election, but they are also imploring him to protect their benefits.
All right, Mel, thank you so much. This morning, major helicopter restrictions are now in place around D.C.'s Reagan National Airport. This urgent action from the National Transportation Safety Board comes after that deadly midair crash between a military helicopter and a passenger plane earlier this year. The NTSB is also saying that it found thousands of close calls at the airport over the last decade. NBC News correspondent Sam Brock is here with the latest on all this. Sam, good morning.
Yeah, Joe, good morning. Look, the language is obviously incredibly strong here. We're talking about the NTSB chair calling those near misses an intolerable risk to public safety. The report really highlighting a razor-thin margin between where planes are approaching one runway at DCA and where helicopters can fly. Just 75 feet of separation. Transportation officials plan on adopting those tighter restrictions Joe just mentioned on choppers, even as they're asking why it took a deadly accident to sound the alarm. This morning, revamped rules in the air around D.C.'s Reagan National Airport. At first, a temporary change restricting non-essential helicopters near DCA will remain in place following January's midair collision that claimed 67 lives. The Department of Transportation now permanently banning helicopters on what's called Route 4 while planes are taking off or landing on runway 33. Those are the same flight paths involved in the nighttime crash between an American Airlines regional jet and an Army helicopter.
We've determined that the existing separation distance pose an intolerable risk to aviation safety by increasing the chances of a mid-air collision at DCA.
The NTSB says it discovered a dangerous trend of near misses, with choppers previously allowed to fly as close as 75 feet from commercial aircraft.
It's only a 75-foot distance between the top of the helicopter route and the flight path of the airplane. 75 feet. It was an accident waiting to happen, unfortunately.
The NTSB says it found more than 15,000 close proximity events between October 2021 and December 2024. And over more than a decade, alerts were triggered at least once a month for an automated cockpit collision avoidance warning.
It's a traffic alert that's urgent. And to have one of those happen at least once a month during a 14-year period is shocking to me.
As the Transportation Secretary demanding answers.
How did the FAA not know? How do they not study the data to say, hey, this is a hot spot, we're having near misses, and if we don't change our way, we're going to lose lives?
So Secretary Duffy there also calling on the Congress to greenlight some tens of billions of dollars, Joe, to be able to address our aging air traffic control system. But the one thing that really stuck out to me, having spoken with Jeff Gazzetti, that aviation expert, is that he says he was shocked to learn once a month or more that TCAS alert, what goes off to prevent aircraft, like this is the last line of defense from colliding midair, once a month for a 14-year period or more than once a month just at DCA. That was deeply shocking and upsetting to him, and I'm sure the aviation community at large as well.
I think a lot of people are just stunned seeing the details in this report now, some action being taken. All right, Sam, thank you so much. It has been nearly a week since authorities began their search for a college student who went missing in the Dominican Republic while on spring break. New surveillance footage shows the 20-year-old woman walking with friends shortly before she vanished near a popular resort in Punta Cana. NBC News correspondent Jesse Kirsch joins us from there now with some big developments. Jesse, good morning.
U.S. officials are now confirming a person of interest has been identified in this case. Meanwhile, Dominican Republic police have referred us to a prosecutor's office, and we have not yet heard back. All of this as we approach one full week since that young woman disappeared.
This was one of the last times Sudiksha Kunanki was seen before she vanished in the Dominican Republic more than 6 days ago.
That's Kunanki.
The country's national police now confirming this surveillance video shows the University of Pittsburgh junior walking toward the beach around 4 a.m. last Thursday.
Es parte de la investigación.
Dominican Republic police say the group she was with included a 24-year-old man from the U.S. Investigators saying he's the last person known to have been with Kunanki on the beach. He has not been named a suspect, but his statements are under scrutiny. This morning, authorities in Virginia, where Kunanki is a resident, weighing in. A spokesperson for the Loudoun County Sheriff's Department, which does not have jurisdiction in the case, but is assisting in the Dominican Republic, saying U.S. investigators have identified a person of interest in the case, and saying, quote, this is still a missing person case. NBC News reached out to officials in the Dominican Republic overnight for comment, but it remains unclear whether local investigators share that view. Dominican Republic investigators say Kunanki's friends returned to the Punta Cana resort where they were staying roughly 40 minutes after they went to the beach. But local authorities believe Kunanki stayed behind with at least one person. And hours later, they say that person came back alone. Meanwhile, Dominican Republic police say Kunanki's friends went on an excursion that same day, with roughly 12 hours passing before they realized she was missing and alerted the hotel. The Dominican Republic's president says one of the last people with Kunanki reported they were both hit by a wave. Dominican Republic police telling us no blood or signs of violence have been found on the beach.
Police tell us at least twice they've had a team out here watching to see how the water moves.
Sudiksha Kunanki's family publicly asking for privacy, but telling NBC News they're experiencing a lot of sadness and pain.
They're holding up as good as can be expected under these very, very difficult circumstances.
Dominican Republic police also tell us there are more than 300 men and women who are working on this investigation. Back to you.
Jesse Kirsch. Jesse, thank you so much. The measles outbreak across the country is growing at an alarming rate, with cases now reported in at least 15 states. Health officials say the majority of infections are in people who are not vaccinated. Adding to concerns, some families are turning to alternative treatments instead of proven vaccines, something doctors warn could be dangerous. NBC News correspondent Liz Kreutz joins us now with the latest on what you need to know. Liz, good morning.
Hey, Joe, good morning. Health officials say this measles crisis is only getting worse. These news outbreaks causing the death of a child in Texas and the suspected death of an adult in New Mexico. Both were unvaccinated, and experts say, as you mentioned, the vast majority of infections are in patients who didn't get the vaccine.
This morning, new numbers show the measles virus spreading like wildfire. Texas, the center of the worst outbreak, now up to 223 cases, nearly double that from last month. In nearby New Mexico, 33 cases, more than triple the number from last week. Maryland and the city of Los Angeles seeing their first cases this week after residents who traveled overseas became infected and returned through Dulles and LAX airports. The super contagious virus now confirmed in at least 15 states, spreading easily through the air when an infected person talks, coughs, or sneezes, remaining in the air and on surfaces for hours.
Measles can have some really, really serious long-term consequences. It can cause encephalitis, which is basically an infection in your brain that causes brain swelling and can cause permanent brain damage.
While the CDC says the measles vaccine is the best defense, doctors worry some families are turning to alternative treatments like cod liver oil and other supplements rich in vitamin A.
They want something other than a vaccine to be able to protect their children. And at this point in time, we don't have those alternative treatments.
While Health and Human Services Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. says the vaccine does protect children against measles, he also touts vitamin A as an effective therapy. Writing in an op-ed last week, vitamin A can dramatically reduce measles mortality.
What is the cure for measles? Cure for measles is chicken soup and vitamin A.
While the CDC says vitamin A may be used to treat measles under strict doctor supervision, the American Academy of Pediatrics says it doesn't prevent measles and can be harmful to children in large or prolonged doses.
The best treatment that we know that has been proven for decades is vaccination. And that is probably the biggest message that needs to come out of this outbreak.
Now, experts say if you don't know your vaccination status, here is a quick lesson. Anyone born before 1957 is likely immune from previous infection. From 1957 to 68, the vaccine was not as effective, and you should get a booster. From 68 to 1989, the guidance was only one shot, so you should probably get a second shot, too. It really can't hurt you. But, of course, anyone who is immunocompromised or pregnant should consult their doctor first.
All right,
Joe?
Liz, thank you so much. This morning, another round of heavy rain, snow, gusty winds hitting the West Coast. NBC News meteorologist Angie Lassman is here with your News Now forecast. Angie, good morning.
Good morning, Joe. Another busy one, and that storm system just ramping up here over the next 24 to 48 hours for our friends out west. We do have the winter alerts up for a lot of folks across the Great Basin and, of course, points west of that. This is going to be the kind of system that brings us multiple impacts. The heavy rain, the snow, and the winds all associated with this, and up and down the coast, really. Pacific Northwest to points south. We'll see parts of Southern California deal with that flood threat today and potentially into tomorrow. Notice, though, tomorrow the system moves a little farther to the east, and we've got it centered over the Great Basin, where we'll see a good amount of snow spreading across that region and some rain for parts of the desert Southwest. By the time we wrap up the work week, though, it's across the center of the country. We've got some showers, some thunderstorm activity, and it could be severe, specifically for the evening hours across the Mississippi Valley. And we've also got some snow across parts of the Rockies, along with some windy conditions, too. But let's focus on those flood alerts, because they've been up for a while, and they're going to stay up through the day today. You got 21 million people stretching essentially from Santa Barbara all the way down to San Diego. Of course, LA is included in that. And we're concerned specifically about the LA Santa Barbara area with flash flooding through the day today. We're going to see heavy amounts of rain in a short amount of time period. That means that those mudslides, the rock slides, all of that is going to be on the table as we gear up for maybe 3 to even up to 4 inches in some of these spots, specifically across those burn scar areas. Snowfall amounts about 3, maybe 4 feet across this region, specifically centered for the Sierra Mountains. That's where you'll see the highest snowfall totals, but we could see 6 inches or so across parts of the Great Basin as well. Big picture look for our temperatures. Boy, it was warm yesterday. We've got some warmth still today, mid-60s for D.C., upper 70s for St. Louis and Lexington. We've still got the mid-80s in place for Dallas, and that warmth stays with us tomorrow, Joe, before we start to see a couple of spots kind of winding down back to more typical temperatures just in time for the weekend.
Yesterday was awesome. I'd like to put in a request to do that again.
Listen, I saw people in Central Park in their bathing suits, so
okay.
We are ready for the warmth.
I'm sorry
here.
you had to see me like that, Angie.
Oh, no. Right. Truth comes out.
Thanks, Angie. Appreciate it.
You got it.
Much more to come on this hour of Morning News Now. We will have a fresh look at inflation here in America as President Trump's tariffs on steel and aluminum imports hit the books. But how's it all impacting wallets on Main Street? We're going to dig into some new numbers out just this morning. First, after the break, Ukraine now saying it's ready to accept a ceasefire deal with Russia. But will Moscow play along? Our Richard Engel has the latest next. Welcome back. The United States is resuming military aid and intelligence sharing with Ukraine. It's because Kyiv says it's ready to accept a 30-day ceasefire in its war with Russia. The breakthrough came after U.S. and Ukrainian officials held talks in Saudi Arabia. NBC's chief foreign correspondent Richard Engel has the latest.
It has been a wild week for the people here in Ukraine. First, they were cut off by President Trump. Now, the Ukrainian government has accepted unilaterally a U.S. ceasefire proposal. It is the first serious ceasefire deal on the table since Russia invaded this country 3 years ago. After a day of marathon talks, Ukraine and the Trump administration appeared to bury the hatchet. The allies now back on the same page. In Saudi Arabia, Ukraine accepted a proposal brought by the U.S. for a total, immediate ceasefire lasting 30 days. Ukraine would pause fighting in the air, at sea, and at the front line, but only if Russia agrees as well.
The ball's now in their court.
In exchange for the full ceasefire, more than the partial one Ukraine had been proposing, the Trump administration backed away from its strong-arm tactics, resuming intelligence sharing with Ukraine and the supply of American weapons. Both were suspended after that disastrous meeting in the Oval Office when President Trump and Vice President Vance accused Ukrainian President Zelensky of being unappreciative of American assistance and not being serious about peace. President Trump said Ukraine has changed its position.
The last visit you saw at the Oval Office, that's a total ceasefire. Ukraine has agreed to it, and hopefully Russia will agree to it. We're going to meet with them later on today and tomorrow.
Is Zelensky invited back to the White House?
Sure.
President Zelensky thanked President Trump and said the U.S. must now try to convince Russia to stop its attacks, which continued overnight, even after the announcement. We agree, and if the Russians agree, silence will take effect at that very moment, Zelensky said. The Trump ceasefire would not end the war. It does not lay out terms, define territorial concessions, NATO membership, or other security arrangements. but it could pause the fighting in this conflict that has killed and injured around 1 million people on both sides and open the door for negotiations. The Kremlin this morning said it would not respond to the ceasefire until it hears more from the Americans. President Trump is expected to speak with President Putin soon.
All right, Richard, thank you. More international news now. Dozens of people have been rescued after a train was hijacked in Pakistan. NBC News reporter Matt Bodner is in London with that and some other world news. Matt, good morning.
Joe, good morning. 155 passengers have been rescued as part of the response by Pakistani authorities to this dramatic hijacking. Dozens remain hostage to the attackers, and Reuters is reporting that men wearing suicide vests have been spotted sitting amongst those hostages, significantly complicating rescue efforts. The attack began with separatist militants blowing up train tracks and then opening fire on the train after it stopped. Credit for the attack has been claimed by the Baloch Liberation Group, and this is an ethnic armed group. They've been threatening to begin executing hostages if Baloch political prisoners they claim have been abducted by the Pakistani military are not freed. Moving along now to the Philippines, lawyers representing former President Rodrigo Duterte are demanding he be returned to Manila. Duterte was arrested yesterday in Manila airport when returning from Hong Kong. The arrest was made in accordance with an international criminal court warrant accusing him of crimes against humanity for tactics employed during his war on drugs. He was flown to The Hague last night. His lawyers had filed an appeal to the Philippine Supreme Court, claiming that he was abducted. We'll wrap up this hour right here in the United Kingdom. Manchester United, one of the world's most famous football clubs, has announced plans to build a giant new stadium with a capacity of 100,000 people. In other words, it's smaller than the Big House. Man U has decided they'd rather build this new stadium rather than redevelop their existing home, that is Old Trafford. The new stadium will be built in the area around the existing stadium, and the club says they expect the project to bring almost $10 billion to the local economy. Back to you.
All right, $10 billion. That's just in beer, too, by the way. Matt, thank you so much. Appreciate it. Staying with international news this morning, we are getting a first-hand look at some remarkable new discoveries being unearthed in the ancient Roman city of Pompeii. A once-in-a-generation dig is underway nearly 2,000 years after it was buried under volcanic ash. NBC News international correspondent Molly Hunter is there and joins us now with the details about these amazing discoveries. Molly, good morning.
Joe, good morning to you. I mean, once in a generation dig, once in a lifetime experience for our crew. So we are at the base of Mount Vesuvius, which, by the way, still an active volcano. But we're back at Pompeii, and NBC News has covered the discoveries over the last couple of years. But, Joe, this morning we have something that will change the way that you understand and that we kind of know how the super rich lived back in 79 AD.
In the shadow of the still smoldering volcano Vesuvius lie the ruins of the sprawling Roman metropolis Pompeii. 2,000 years ago, its streets, its grand houses, and its people buried. Allowed in before the crowds, NBC News is the first U.S. crew to see the latest discoveries of the most important dig in the last 100 years. It centers around this massive villa, Casa del Tiasso. Director General Dr. Gabriel Zuchtriegel takes us inside.
And this is it. We're now
unveiled just 2 weeks ago, a ruby red banquet hall, spectacular frescoes on 3 walls with near life-sized figures. And the focus, this woman, a mortal awaiting initiation into the mysterious cults of Dionysus, the Greek god of wine and ecstasy. But for the guests, the experience wasn't just about fine dining.
You had theater, dancers.
It was all connected.
It was kind of a total work of art.
Outside of the parties, of which there were many, these grand houses offered other forms of delight.
Now, one of the big clues that this was a rich man's house is having a private bathhouse inside. This was the locker room where you would start, get naked, and head to the caldarium. This was the modern-day sauna. There was a boiler over there, heat coming up through the floor, through the walls, and then you would go next door to the tepidarium, where you got your spa treatments. And finally, you'd finish in the frigidarium and a cold plunge into that pool.
Oh, this room would have been fantastic.
Where business got done.
Exactly. Romans didn't have offices, so this was part of their office.
But even if you were super rich in 79 AD, as imagined in the movie Pompeii, Vesuvius didn't discriminate.
If you're left in the city at that point, you're never going to leave.
So anyone who stayed died?
Yes.
Archaeologist Dr. Sophie Hay leads us down into this tiny room. 2 skeletons were recently uncovered, barricaded inside.
This room that provided sort of sanctuary and safety potentially in their heads became their tomb.
But who were they and why didn't they leave?
The ancient world still presents us with more questions than we have answers.
But that's why you keep digging.
Exactly.
Just so many big questions. Now, that site specifically, it's just over here off camera. They say they found about 55 rooms out of a massive villa. They think, and I got to say, archaeologists, notoriously very optimistic creatures, they think there could be 100 rooms just in that compound. But, Joe, I'm standing on the 1/3 of the city that is still not excavated. So exciting digging ahead.
So
Joe?
much. And that spa looked pretty swanky there, Molly.
No, and cold plunges making a comeback 2,000 years later.
Exactly. There you go. It started there. All right, Molly. Great report. Thank you so much. Coming up, it is a popular supplement that can be used to boost energy, and it's sold at spots like gas stations, bodegas, or smoke shops nationwide. But now some people are sounding the alarm on Kratom for the health risks that can potentially come along with it. That story next. We're back with growing safety concerns around an herbal supplement called Kratom. It is legal across most of the U.S. It's low cost and can be used as a stimulant or a sedative. But more people are calling for stricter regulations. NBC News correspondent Stephen Romo explains.
I'll never forget, those words. He's unresponsive,
Nearly 2 years ago, Trish Bisson's son, CJ Holowak, collapsed at work and died at just 33.
I'm confident that it was Kratom that killed him.
Sold readily at smoke shops, convenience stores, and gas stations, Kratom is derived from a plant from Southeast Asia and often marketed as a supplement to boost energy, manage pain, and even possibly help kick addictions. It can be bought in liquid, tablet, or powder form. Small doses, the DEA says, provide a stimulant effect. High doses, a sedative effect. And it's big business, forecast to be a nearly $16 billion industry by 2032. Bisson says CJ was taking a concentrated liquid form for pain after breaking his arm in 2021.
Did he say it was helping, or what were your thoughts?
He did say it was helping. He wrote in that text, it's helping.
An autopsy found CJ died from cardiac arrest due to mixed drug intoxication, including Kratom. The other substances in his system, Bisson says, were doctor-prescribed medications he'd been taking for years.
We found, I would say, hundreds of empty bottles of Kratom.
She's now suing the maker of the Kratom her son took and pushing for a bill that would prohibit the sale of Kratom in New Jersey, like in these 6 states and Washington, D.C.
Take it off the shelves. It's as simple as that.
But down in Houston, Madeline Sklar credits Kratom with saving her life. She turned to Kratom to deal with chronic back pain after stopping prescription opioids.
I have degenerative disc disease in both my neck and back. Taking high-powered opioids, my pain level on a good day would be a 6. But when I was using Kratom and first got started with it, my pain level seriously goes to a 0.
I wouldn't want my kid going into a gas station, picking up a concentrated extract and chugging the whole thing.
Professor Chris McCurdy of the College of Pharmacy at the University of Florida has studied Kratom for years. He says in low doses, it's about as addictive as coffee, but there isn't enough research on these new higher dose products. CDC data from 2023 shows 37 states and Washington, D.C. had 1,151 overdose deaths in which Kratom was detected. But Kratom's contribution to these deaths is unclear. The FDA doesn't regulate it, but warns the public against the use of Kratom for medical treatment.
The products are on the market because they are treated at this time as a food or a dietary ingredient.
The American Kratom Association accuses the FDA of a relentless campaign to keep Kratom off the market rather than ensuring consumer safety. The FDA did not respond to our request for comment.
Having her share her experience with Kratom. I met her on TikTok.
Sklar, who hosts a podcast about Kratom, says she's far from the only success story. But even she agrees more laws are needed. For Trish Bisson,
my son died and he shouldn't have died.
It's just not worth the risk. Stephen Roman, NBC News, Freehold, New Jersey.
Coming up, we are circling back around to President Trump's ongoing global tariff tussle with the latest read on inflation here in America. We're digging into some new numbers and where folks might be feeling the pinch of higher prices already. Stay with us. We're watching your wallet next. We're back with some breaking economic data. We've got new numbers out this morning on inflation. They show inflation is looking a little better than was expected. The Consumer Price Index rose 2.8% in February. That's the year-over-year number. Inflation is up 0.2% on a month-over-month basis. NBC News business and data correspondent Brian Chung joined us now to break down the numbers. Brian, first let's talk big picture. Walk us through those big numbers, how they compare with what we saw at the very beginning of the year.
Yeah, good morning, Joe. The inflation numbers not only show a sign of improvement, but it actually breaks a multi-month streak of rising inflation, which we hadn't wanted to see. As you mentioned, 2.8%. That's how much prices rose in America between February of this year and February of last year. That is down from 3% that we got as a reading in January. And as you could see, breaks that streak since basically the fall last year of a rising rate of inflation. Although I want to still point out that the inflation rate that economists say is healthy is still somewhere closer to 2%. So a lot more work to do on that front. But again, what economists were expecting going into this report was 2.9% around here. So again, that number coming in a little bit below estimates, certainly welcome news. And actually, you're seeing stock market futures trading higher, implying that the market open could be green, which would be welcome news after that slide that we've seen on Wall Street the past few days, Joe.
Yeah, no kidding. So let's break it down by category. Where are we seeing some of the biggest hikes?
Yeah, so when it comes to just the breakout of these categories, food, energy, and shelter, these are now the monthly changes that we're talking about here. So between January and February, food prices did go up, but they went up by 0.2%. That's a slower pace than the 0.4% we saw in the month prior. That's welcome news. Same story with energy prices. It rose by just 1% entirely in the month of January. It only went up by, again, 0.2% in the month of February. And then shelter costs, this is the biggest one for most Americans, just putting a roof over your head. It increased by 0.4% between December and January. It slowed to just 0.3% in February. So again, that also welcome news here. And I think all of that contributing to the fact that the overall headline inflation number came in below estimates, Joe.
Yeah, and that energy number is certainly a welcome change for so many people. So what happens if we break it down even more, the stuff we just spend money on every single day?
Yeah, because these are rates of change here, but I do want to show just the average prices that we see, right? These are the relatable things. Eggs. This is the one that everyone is talking about right now. A year ago, it's crazy to think about this. A year ago, it was $3 per dozen on average as measured by the government. Get this, now $5.90. A lot of that owing to, of course, the bird flu crisis, which we've been covering extensively here at NBC. But again, that's almost double what we saw last year. That is pinching a lot of American wallets. Milk prices going basically sideways, about $4.03, essentially unchanged from where we were in February. But then gasoline prices actually getting cheaper, interestingly, between February of last year and February of this year. Now, on average, again, depends on where you live, $3.26 per gallon. That's welcome news for a lot of people that might be trying to gear up for spring break.
All right, eggs up, gas down. We'll take it. Brian, thank you so much. Keeping up with your money news, we've got some news from Spotify this morning. CNBC's Savannah Henao has that and some other financial headlines. Savannah, good morning.
Hey, Joe, good morning to you. So Spotify says that it paid more than $10 billion in royalties to the music industry last year. The company is trying to counter criticism that it's failed to share the wealth from the era of streaming music. Now, Spotify says the payments represent more than 60% of its total revenue in 2024, and the payout is the largest in music industry history. Now, Spotify comparing itself to Tower Records at the peak of CD sales in the early 2000s. Backlash from musicians has cooled in recent years as Spotify has grown to 675 million users worldwide, with 263 million paying to use the app. Lyft is launching a simpler version of the app for senior citizens later this year as it tries to further distinguish itself from rival Uber. Lyft Silver will allow older users to share ride details with a contact and use digital gift cards sent by people they know. Lyft has set up a wait list for interested users to get updates on when Lyft Silver will launch in their markets. And the future of technology may not live on your wrist. Global sales of smartwatches dropping for the first time last year, largely due to a big decline in popularity of the Apple Watch. Research from Counterpoint says shipments fell 7% in 2024, with Apple Watches falling by 19%. Analysts blame the slump on a lack of new features in Apple's latest devices and a rumored high-end Ultra 3 model that never materialized, Joe. I don't know how many more features I need on my watch. I feel like I've got everything I need.
A watch
what else
that
could you
works
possibly
out
give me?
for you. It needs to do the workout for you.
Right,
and then you lose
exactly.
the calories. But
right.
that is impossible. Sorry. Savannah, thank you so much. Coming up, a months-long voyage to the final frontier, finally, we hope, coming to a close. After the break, we're ready to launch with NASA's and SpaceX's joint mission to bring astronauts Butch Wilmore and Sunny Williams back down to Earth. It all starts tonight. We'll have a preview. Stay with us. We'll be right back. This morning, astronauts Butch Wilmore and Sunny Williams are one step closer to coming home. As we all know, their 10-day mission, well, it's turned in about 9 months, but now NASA and SpaceX are preparing to launch a rocket to the International Space Station tonight to go get them. NBC News senior correspondent Tom Costello is at the Kennedy Space Center with details.
Good morning. So Butch Wilmore and Sunny Williams have been on the International Space Station since last September. You may recall last June they launched on a Boeing Starliner mission to test out the new Boeing spaceship. NASA didn't like that spaceship, didn't think it was safe to come back. So Butch and Sunny have been on station ever since. Tonight, Crew 10, NASA SpaceX, lifts off. That means Butch and Sunny should be able to come back as soon as next week. Arriving in Florida, NASA SpaceX Crew 10, preparing to launch to the space station on a 6-month rotation.
We've been working a long time to be ready for launch, and we are very, very excited to be here.
A mission that will also allow Sunny Williams and Butch Wilmore to come home 9 months after leaving Earth. It was last June 5th when Sunny and Butch launched on a brand new Boeing Starliner spaceship for a 10-day mission. But Starliner soon developed helium leaks and engine thruster problems. Worried that Starliner wasn't safe, NASA ordered Wilmore and Williams to stay on the station. Starliner came home empty, but only after a SpaceX Crew 9 ship arrived on station with just 2 crew members. Williams and Wilmore then joined Crew 9 for a 6-month stay on station. Sunny soon took over as space station commander, and they both carried out a critical 5.5-hour spacewalk to repair a radio communications unit. That spacewalk, Williams' 9th overall, puts her in the record books for the most time spent in the vacuum of space by a woman. Now, 9 months later, they still insist they're not angry and they don't feel NASA abandoned them.
We came up prepared to stay long, even though we planned to stay short. That's what we do in human spaceflight.
Only 5 NASA astronauts have ever spent more consecutive days in orbit than Sunny and Butch. The hardest part, says Sunny, is the impact on their families back on Earth.
It's been a roller coaster for them, probably a little bit more so than for us, to not know exactly when we're coming back.
We are just feel fortunate and thankful, though, that we have seats, and we'll be coming home, riding the plasma, splashing down in the ocean.
Now, with Crew 10 preparing to launch, Sunny and Butch are preparing to come home.
Honestly, I'm kind of most looking forward to breaking bread with those guys, talking to them, giving them big hugs.
So here's the timeline here. About 4 to 7 days after Crew 10 docks with the space station, Butch and Sunny should be able to come back. That all depends on the weather in terms of the landing, in terms of the ocean conditions. It could be as soon as Sunday, could be sometime next week before Butch and Sunny are, in fact, back here on planet Earth. Back to you.
All right, Tom, thank you so much. Of course, we can't finish this conversation without speaking with Mike Massimino, one of our favorite guests here on the show, also former NASA astronaut and author of Moonshot, a NASA Astronaut's Guide to Achieving the Impossible. Mike, always good to have you with us. So let's start with how they're prepping at the International Space Station. What do they have to do mentally and physically, especially after so much time in space, to prepare to come home?
Well, right now, they're busy getting ready for this new crew that's coming up. The reason is going to be a few days in between the time that new crew arrives and that Sunny and Butch will be coming back is that they need to do a handover. So they're getting ready to, what do we need to tell them? What do we need to brief them on? Clearing out their bedrooms, clearing out the crew quarters, making a nice housekeeping. Get all their stuff out of the bedroom. So the new tenant is coming in, probably getting some food ready for them and so on, making sure that they're going to have a a good start to their expedition.
So Tom laid out this schedule here. It could be as early as Sunday, but he said, 4 to 7 days after docking. I mean, explain how this is actually going to play out once the ship gets up there.
So the first thing is their relief needs to come up. You know, their spaceship they're going to return on has been up there since the Crew 9 astronauts got up there. So that's going to be their way back. This is their relief that's coming up. That's going to continue with another expedition. So, sorry, you said again.
So what are the possibilities?
Okay,
it could be Sunday.
So they're going to do this handover. It's probably I would think they usually like to do things as early as you can, kind of at the beginning of the window. So if they're able to return them on Sunday, they'll do that. But they'll look at first. They got to get these guys off the ground. So if they have a successful launch and a good rendezvous and docking, and they get them inside, then they'll start seeing when they can actually bring them back. And so there's different things that come into play. The other traffic, what else is expected to come up to the space station? If anything is going to be undocking from the space station. The handover should only take a couple days. I think Sunday is probably the most likely time, but they're also going to look at weather. So I was delayed in space for a couple days because of bad weather in Florida. It could happen to them as well. But if the weather looks good, I think Sunday is probably the most likely day they'll be coming back.
When Sun and Butch finally do splash down, what are the procedures we'd expect them to go through once they're back on Earth?
So once they get back, they're going to get checked out by the recovery crew. They'll splash down in the ocean. These quick boats will go out and make sure they're okay, these fast boats. And then they'll have a bigger ship, a recovery ship, take the spacecraft onto that ship. There'll be doctors on board. There's always a flight surgeon there to check them out. So they'll get them out, help them out of their spaceship, seeing how they're doing, check them out. And then they'll either go to one of two places. They'll either go back to the Kennedy Space Center or they'll go straight to Houston. They'll probably make that call. They'll probably have a plan, but they may make that call even closer to the time that they come back. They'll probably get some food in them and some more liquids and so on and get reunited with their family fairly early. And then we're going to hear from them. I would think probably in this case, because there's going to be a great interest, it might be right away, depending on the timing, see what hour they come back, or it might be the next day. But I think pretty soon after they get back to planet Earth, we'll be hearing from them. But they're going to get checked out, make sure everything's good physically, and get reunited with their families first.
I'm wondering if Sunny's going to get a haircut or continue to rock that amazing hair.
That hair is, since I've known her, the hair's been that length.
Okay, so
she might get a little bit of a trim.
A little bit of a trim, but she's that.
Yeah.
And you just got to imagine what's first on the menu after all that time up there.
Yeah, it depends. You know, for me, it was pizza. I actually ordered a pizza from space, Joe. I didn't want that. I didn't want the order to get messed up, and I really did. Through email, I said, this is what we want. And we were going to be back at the Kennedy Space Center that evening. And it's kind of weird. You know, I was only up for a couple weeks at a time, but you get back, you know, you look up at the sky, it was just there, and now you're back home.
Best pizza you ever had.
It was pretty good. Yeah.
Mike Massimino, thank you so much.
You bet. Thanks, Joe.
All right, that is going to do it for this hour. Morning News Now, but don't go anywhere. The news continues right now.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.